Okay, so we're good to go with the body language segment. So let's just think first, why should we bother considering nonverbal communication? Why is body language important? It's not the most important topic that we can cover, but it certainly is an interesting channel of information. And it's an interesting channel of information because of the ability of our brains to process information. During the program, I mentioned that our brains process about 11 million pieces of information per second coming in from all of our senses and from all of the stimuli in the outside world. And yet we're only conscious in any second of about 40 of those bits of information. There's a similar disparity between the way we talk and the way we think. We talk at 100 words per minute, but we think at 800 words per minute or 50,000 words per hour. And what frequently happens is that the 700 words that are happening underneath the surface, the internal talk, often leak out from the subconscious through the body as body language, facial expressions, and emotional displays of other kinds. Now, with practice, you can plug those leaks so that you don't miscommunicate. This segment is not going to be so much about the sort of magic trick of reading what somebody's thinking from their body language, but looking at body language and nonverbal communication from the point of view of professionals who want to communicate a very clear message and don't want the body language channel to be contradicting the verbal channel, contradicting what's coming out of their mouths, contradicting what's coming out in their pitches. So what we want to learn to do is to spot leaks in other people when we see their true intent and their true feelings leak out through body language, and to be able to read what's coming from them while at the same time preventing those same leaks from happening with us. Now, as we dive into this material, first I'm going to share with you 4 or 5 sort of fundamentals about body language, and then I'll talk about some application stuff. So the first one, let me show you this. So let me ask you, which of these cogs do you think is driving the other? Is it the one on the right-hand side? Is the blue one driving the gray one? Or is the gray one driving the blue one? So just think about it for a moment. Which one is it? And when I do this in person in a classroom, we get a mix. We get some people say it's the blue, some people say it's the gray, some people say they have absolutely no idea. And the reality is you can have absolutely no idea. You don't have enough information. We don't see what's off the screen. What we know for certain is when the blue moves, the gray moves. When the gray moves, the blue moves. Well, let me use that as an analogy or a metaphor for emotions and body language. When you feel an emotion, and during the program, you saw that we feel a lot of emotions. The 24-hour emotions exercise showed that we're only barely aware of that small amount of emotions that make it to our conscious brain. And that continually there's kind of a weather pattern of emotions going on in our brain. Well, every time there is an emotion, there's also a physical reaction. Every time there's a physical reaction, there's an emotion. So they move in concert, and that's really important. It means that when you say something to somebody that triggers them, that causes an emotional reaction, positive or negative, well then not only do they feel it inside, but they likely leak it to the outside world. And this segment is going to look at how do we spot those leaks? How do we understand those leaks? Now, let me just go back up for a second. I'm going to show you a little piece of video that talks in general about body language, and then we'll carry on. So you can see that with body language, it's not something we particularly learn. It's encoded into us, whether it's in our genes or whether it's epigenetic. A genetic predisposition could be triggered by our raising. Doesn't really matter. The bottom line is we all end up communicating non-verbally, whether we like it or not. And for us as salespeople, that's really great news because it gives us an additional potential channel of information about what our client is thinking and how that matches up with what they're saying they're thinking. But from our perspective, it's actually a little bit of bad news because it means that when we go inside our heads and we start thinking about something that's contrary to the message that we're communicating, well, then sometimes that can confuse the client, because I'll say this a few times during this presentation. When a verbal message conflicts with a non-verbal message, we believe instinctively the non-verbal message. So if something is coming out your mouth that is saying all very positive, trustworthy things, but your body language or facial expressions are saying untrustworthy, non-genuine things, well, then it's likely that the people you're communicating to are going to subconsciously favor the message that's coming through those nonverbal channels. So it's very, very important that we understand how they work and we manage them in ourselves and be aware of them in other people. So the first fundamental I wanted to get across to you is body language is not something that needs to be learned, and it's certainly not something that can be unlearned. You need to live with it. You need to work around it. Second thing I want to share with you, and this is a theme that came out in the program a lot, and that's one of trust. It has always been about trust. Since our most primitive times, our interactions with our environment and the people in that environment have always been characterized by a question in our brain that pops up the first time we meet somebody or encounter a situation, and that is this a reward situation or is this a threat situation? When we did the EI experience, the good boss, bad boss experience, you saw that the bad boss continually triggered your emotional brain into an undesirable, unproductive condition of threat. And that affected the way you thought, the way you showed up, the decisions you made, and the extent to which you engaged. You saw that your best boss continually triggered you into a reward state where you were more engaged, more open, more positive. Well, quite apart, or the reality is that every single situation like that triggers you into reward or threat, as we said before. And that's reflected in our body language. So the first consideration of primitive man was always, is this person a friend or foe? So we are only 100,000 years on from the last major evolution of the human species, and nothing much has changed over that period. So in the sense of the way that the emotional brain works and body language works, it hasn't changed much since our ancient Stone Age antecedents were walking the earth. And one of the things we always worried about in survival is somebody going to kill us? Now, if you want to kill a human, you have to go after their vulnerable parts. Now, is the head vulnerable? Yeah, but there is that big bony cage that houses the most important part of our body, the brain, and protects it somewhat. Our heart and our lungs are wrapped in another cage, in the rib cage, which keeps it fairly safe, or at least safer than other softer parts of our body. So the parts that we instinctively feel are vulnerable to outside attack are those parts in the abdomen and the lower abdomen and groin area. And it's really important to understand that your coding, your genetic disposition is to protect those parts of the body. And you see that, and we'll see it in some of the photographs as we go through. You see that that's reflected in the way that we hold ourselves when we're feeling vulnerable. Notice the way people often cover their groin area, or they fold their arms or whatever to cover those vulnerable parts. We'll see the implication of this later on. For now, I just want you to be aware, we're always thinking, or we're not thinking, we're always subconsciously disposed to protect these vulnerable areas. The third thing is these things. We have more nerve endings in our hands than we have in most other parts of the body put together. With these hands, we can touch one another, we can do very, very fine work, we can communicate very effectively, we can do so much, and there's a tremendous amount of nerve endings in them. And so we tend to pay attention to our own hands and to the hands of other people. And what we tend to be tuned into is the extent to which somebody is either palms up or palms down, okay? Now, if this was a live session, I'd do a demonstration where I would first talk to you as a group, and I'd say, for example, hey, I'd like all of the people over here on this side, please, would you come over here? And all of the people who are over here on this side, please come over here. And all of the people just at the back there, please come down the front. And I ask people, how do they feel about that? And what they say is, you know, as long as it makes sense, I don't see anything wrong with the request that you're making. It doesn't jar me in the slightest. So there's palms open. Here are palms down. If I go to you and I say, hey, you down the back there, I'd like you to come up to the front. I'd like you people up there to come down to here. And you folks in the very back, come on down here. When I ask people, how do they feel about that? They'll say, it feels more like a directive. It feels like an imperative. It feels like I'm being told what to do. And then finally, I'll usually do a demonstration where I say, hey, I'd like all the people, you guys up there, I'd like you to come down here. I'd like you folks at the back to come over here. And I'd like you guys over on the right-hand side to come down here. So I want everybody down here. Let's do it now. And I ask people, how do they feel? And they say, a word that often comes up is policeman, authority, in charge. And it feels rude. Now, it's really important we read those hand positions all the time without even being aware of it. So now I want you to become aware of it. During the program, I said awareness is curative. What's your default position for hands when you're talking to people? Are you keeping them open? Are they closed? Are they bunched? Are you pointing a lot? Now, maybe you never thought about it before. It's time to think about it. Become aware that open hands, we'll see examples of it now in a moment, are much more powerful and communicative in a positive sense than closed fists, pointing, or palms down sort of position. Here are a couple of pictures. Here's Berlusconi, the former premier of Italy. And this is a classic sort of thing that you see in people who are in charge, want to let you know they're in charge. And you see, for example, if we go back to Italians, you see that Mussolini used to do that a lot. And people who feel in command will say, okay, calm it down. It's very imperative, okay? Here was Berlusconi when he was in a little bit of difficulty, and he's saying, guys, please, and there's a little bit of what they call the Gallic shrug, the kind of, I don't know. But the open hands very much signify I have nothing to hide. Look, I'm being open with you. Look, my hands are open. And those are two, opposite examples with Berlusconi. Now, the third one is an unfortunate example of a miss hand signal for the person that shows it. I'll show it to you now in a moment. But this symbol from Roman times has always been a symbol of power. When you greeted Caesar, it was always Hail Caesar. So you hailed him with this, and it was an indication of power. It was a statement that we are the guys in charge. And you still see that in modern times. 1939 to 1945, you had Hitler, and the salute was Heil Hitler. So the hand outstretched, the palm down. You got to wonder, hey, how effective would that salute have been if it was, hey, Heil Hitler? You can see the difference, can't you? Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. It's very, very different, which is why it was slightly unfortunate that Angela Merkel, during a presentation a couple of years ago, was captured in this particular photo. A mischievous photographer, really, really bad one. But you can see where that photo could be totally misconstrued and totally misused and totally misunderstood. So palms up, palms down, it's really, really important thing to be aware of. Trying to keep the palms open and visible to people around you is really important. So we've just looked at that demonstration. By the way, this is a really interesting thing. If you look at nature programs, and in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, people will be familiar with David Attenborough, who is really, he's been around for so long, he's kind of premier maker of nature programs. And he did one on chimps and on the Society of Chimps. And here's a young chimp that has been thrown out of the troop of chimps. And he's looking for permission to come back in. What he does is he averts his eyes downwards, he puts his head down, and he holds his hand up to say, look, I'm no threat. Can I come back in? And he goes to the elder of the tribe and he goes, please, I'm no threat, or please, I'm no threat. When we want to communicate that we are open, We're honest. We've nothing to hide. We've no threat. Open palms are the only way to go. Now, don't become overly obsessed with your palms. You have to be comfortable as well. But just be aware of when you're holding your fists closed, whether that's reflective of your internal state or not, people subconsciously read that as anger, tension, something to hide. When you're keeping your palms into yourself, it tends to suggest subconsciously some form of threat. Open hands are no threat whatsoever. So here's an example. Let me just move myself off her face. So here's an example of somebody who's saying, hey, what do you think? So she's opening her hands, and she's got a couple of other gestures going on here. I use her photograph a little bit later on as well. When we want to take somebody prisoner of war, we say, put your hands up. Why do we say that? Because we want to see that there's nothing in their palms. Here are a couple of examples of where, at the extreme, in fairness, where some of these hand gestures can really be seen to be reflective of what's going on inside. And here you got the Swiss, on the right-hand side, you got the former president of France. I can't remember this gentleman's name on the left-hand side, but the message is unmistakable. This is one of those angry things. Now, quite apart from that, later on, I'll say, look for multiple messages. My God, look at those faces. You got the finger pointing going on. You got the eye contact, and you got the scowl on the face as well. But the finger pointing, it's very, very obvious what it is. You do not want to be doing this to your client by accident. And it can be habitual and completely unintentional. What about this one? This is a couple of years ago in a presidential, two presidential candidates debating one another. Look at the guy on the left. I think it's Mitt Romney. I'm not great on politics. The guy on the left, he's pointing. He's trying to tell this guy, give him a directive. And the other chap is responding back with an authoritative gesture. Later on, it progresses on a little bit. Look the way that changed from the flat hand, the closed palm, to his finger pointing. And now the other guy has his palm closed, and he's in this very dominant, hand on the shoulder, patronizing sort of position. Look at the power of the hands in those photographs. Look at the power of the symbol in this photograph. When you're on the end of that finger, man, you know it. So next thing I want to talk about, and it tunes back to this vulnerability thing. We are inclined, when we feel under threat, so when we're making presentations, when we're in a pitch situation where there are multiple people pitching and so on, when we feel any way threatened or any way on the back foot, well, then we tend to go back to our ancient ancestors' predisposition to keep the vulnerable parts of our body closed off. And that sends a message of closed off, something to hide, non-trustworthiness. Now, I have some examples here. They're not the best examples in the world, and it's very hard to get things that are exemplars of this. But look at this lady doing her presentation. And first off, she has a microphone in her hand. Now, in that situation, she probably needed the microphone because maybe there were no tie mics. But what it's doing is it's closing off part of her body. It's closing off a small part of her body. And then her notes are in here, and they're held in front of her torso. And overall, as I look at this photo at least, I have, from her posture and for that close off, I have a sense of she's nervous. And we don't like people to be nervous when they're presenting because emotions are contagious. And if somebody's nervous, it can make us feel nervous, and we don't like being nervous. This one, holy God, what was she thinking? I have no idea what that's supposed to mean, but that particular thing is definitely not open, and it's not saying, hey, have I got some really useful open information I've been totally honest about? Here are a couple examples of open postures. This is often referred to by the basketball or by the body language people as the basketball. And it's a really nice way of keeping the hands open. And when you're talking, expressing what you're saying with the hands like that and still keeping them open, the fingers are splayed and so on and so forth. And overall, the impression is one of openness. Same with this lady, former, I think she was the CEO of HP a couple of years ago. You see the hands open, they're out like that, they're around chest level. And she, coupled with the eye contact, it's really saying, hey guy, I'm really, really open. Be aware of your palms. Be aware of where they are. Be aware of where they are relative to your body. Keep your body open. Keep your palms open. Another thing I want to share with you is what I refer to, and it's not a great title, is the confidence feedback loop. So when an emotion occurs in your emotional brain, it leaks through body language. So when we're feeling threatened, we often close off, or maybe we suddenly close our arms, we close our fists, we cover our groin, we look down, we look away, etc. We do lots of things that are reflective of our internal emotional state. Well, what's really interesting is that it works both ways. When we have an emotion, it comes out in body language. But when we demonstrate particular poses in body language, they also affect our emotions. And the best example of this is one that's often referred to as the Superman pose. Now, if this is a topic that interests you, I encourage you to go on to TED Talks online and find a lady from Harvard Business School called Amy Cuddy, who talks about this, and the research that was done by this, done on this. But this is a pose where you're making your body as big as you possibly can, putting your hands on your hips, standing up tall, looking straight ahead. That's often referred to as the Superman pose because it's the way that Superman stands when in the comics. Well, when you adopt this pose, this sends a message to your emotional brain that says, he's feeling confident. And when you feel confident, it sends a message that says, keep this pose going. So one of the fixes that you can do when you're feeling a little bit threatened, you're feeling a little bit under pressure, when you're not sure how a presentation is going, and inside your head you're starting to say, oh my God, I'm making a mess of this, is intentionally intervene with your emotions by changing your bodily state. And the Superman pose, although it can look slightly arrogant, can be an absolutely wonderful way of doing that. The other way of doing it, and this is one which is a great default position, is the steeple. When people are seen with their fingers together like this, sometimes you tapping them back and forward like this, we get the impression that they feel confident, in control, that they know what they're thinking about. And when we assume this position, well, then it makes us feel more confident. Now, why? They actually don't have the science on it. They have the research to show that that's the case, but they don't yet really understand the psychological basis for it. You may recognize those hands. It's the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. And any time that he didn't know what to do with his hands, he let them fall back to that steeple. Now, not up here in front of your face. I'm doing that simply because the camera has a limited range. In fact, let me stop the share here for one moment. It's more, no, that's not going to help. So let me just go back up again and share the screen again. So it's more at your waist level, maybe sitting, if you're sitting at a desk, that your hands are on the desk and you're in that steeple. If you put them up here, it looks a little bit distracting, and you can look a little bit like the villain in a James Bond movie. But later on, I'm going to say to you, if you don't know what to do with your hands, you're waiting to be presented, you're sitting at a desk, and later on in this, I say, don't fidget, don't scratch your face, don't scratch your nose, etc. And your hands are twitching, you don't know what to do with them, allow them to come into the steeple and sit around your waist level. But here's the key thing I want you to know is when your emotions change, your body state changes. When you change your body state, you can change your emotional state. Be aware of that. You can make yourself feel more comfortable and confident, and in doing so, you appear to others to be more comfortable and confident. And that's what I mean by the confidence feedback loop. Next fundamental is, my God, your face is so communicative. Now, if you're interested in diving into this whole area of the face in any great detail, go and look for a man called Paul Ekman, E-K-M-A-N. And he is the man who first really dived deeply into the science of what he calls micro-expressions. Micro-expressions are quick expressions that flash across your face in as little as 1/5 or 1/25 of a second in response to an emotion. So somebody says to you, Derek, you're going to have to work late tonight. If you froze the camera at the right place, you might see a quick flash of emotion. Now, what happens is, there's what I was talking about, body language leakage. You have an emotional, something comes into your mind, you think, oh my God, I'm going to lose this. You go sad. And then you think, oh my God, I don't want to have a sad face, so you change it. And those micro expressions can go by very, very quickly. But what's interesting, we can see them. When you're in a presentation with a client and you get a sense, hang on, she didn't like that. Just like I said when we spoke about use of self in the program, when you notice the temperature of a conversation or relationship change, when you notice that suddenly emotionally the atmosphere seems to have changed, one of the things that you could be tuning into is a micro expression, the flash by, that you didn't see consciously, but which you tuned into. Now, Ekman can train you online, cost you a couple of $100 to be able to read micro expressions. And it's difficult and it takes an awful lot of time. Here's the key thing. Be aware of your own face. Be aware of the expressions that are going on in your face. Be aware that when you think, oh my God, I'm going to lose this pitch, that comes across and leaks out to your face a lot of the time. When you think, man, I've got this, that will often leak out onto your face and could be misconstrued. And when you think, this guy is an idiot, be really careful, because that can leak out onto your face. And Ekman made a whole study, a whole lifetime study of microexpressions, and has a complete way of reading them. Here, this is are a couple of the expressions modeled by Tim Roth. Tim Roth is the actor who plays a body language expert. It's actually Ekman he plays, or a version of Ekman, in a American show whose name I cannot remember right now. But you can see that every single, and here's the point, every single human on the planet shows sadness, anger, disgust, contempt, surprise, and fear by moving the same muscle. So it's a universal language. Here's the key thing. Be aware of what your face is doing. Be aware of what your client's face is doing. When you ask critical questions, just keep your eye on the face and see, what impression do I get? You probably won't see the expression, just see what impression do I get. So your face is a very potent communicator of language. It's a kind of a semaphore for the emotions that are going on inside your body. Now, when I do this on the program, I will normally get people into pairs and I put them standing back to back. And I give each of them a different set of instruction for the exercise. And the first one, person A, I tell them, and maybe you'll do this now, but in fact, do this now. I say to them, think of the person you love most in the world. Think of the person who makes you smile and who is the most important person in your world. Think of them right now. Close your eyes, bring them to mind. And I want you to imagine that they're standing in front of you and they've got a big smile on their face. They're smiling at you. And those are the instructions I give person A. And then person B is standing back to back with person A, and their instruction says, when you turn around, no matter what person A does, try to keep a straight face. When they turn around and person A is thinking of the person who makes them happier than any person in the world and is tuned into them, they have a smile on their face, and they have something called a Duchenne smile. I'll tell you why it's called Duchenne in a moment. But it's the only single smile that we're aware of that has an emotional impact on people as being genuine. And it's something you can harness. When the people turn to face one another, what typically happens is within 10 or 15 seconds, people burst out laughing, because it starts with they're smiling, and they're feeling pretty good, because when you smile, you get an injection of serotonin and dopamine, the feel-good hormones, into your brain. Because we're all mimics, and we're programmed to mimic people's facial expressions, so we understand what it is they're feeling, person B smiles. Person A smiles at person B smiling, person B smiles at person A smiling. Suddenly you've got this feedback loop. Everybody's brains are being doused in serotonin and dopamine. They're feeling altogether better, and it turns into a laugh-a-thon. Everybody starts laughing. That's the power of a smile to light up a room, light up a relationship, or make somebody feel comfortable. The way you can light up a room very simply is just by simply displaying a Duchenne smile.
We smile.
The researchers suggest that smiling comes from our ancient simian ancestors who showed a fear face. When they were afraid of somebody, they would demonstrate it like our hairy friend here. And a fear face, when demonstrated to another chimpanzee, says, I'm afraid of you, so I'm no threat. Coupled with the hands up and that sort of expression, it turns off any sense of threat in the other individuals around them. So the speculation is that that's where it came from. Now, you heard Ekman say that there are scientists have identified lots of different types of smile. There's only one that is seen as genuine. And we can tell subconsciously. We tune into when somebody's been genuine or not genuine when they show us their smile. Now, many years ago, I was going into a photo shoot. And I was beside a local politician at home, one of our national politicians at home. And I said to him, I hate smiling for photos. I never know what to do. And he taught me a trick. He said, as I did in that exercise, he said, think of the person you love most in the world. Imagine they're standing in front of you, smiling at you, and so on and so forth. And now turn that smile to the camera. Here's what I do. Oh, sorry, I forgot to show you. This is Duchenne. Duchenne was the researcher who discovered the Duchenne smile. And the guy on the right-hand side here had no feeling in his face. So what Duchenne used to do was use electrical impulses to trigger various muscles in his face to see what emotions they cause. So you could trigger a Duchenne smile, you could trigger a social smile, you could trigger anger, you could trigger distress, and so on and so forth. This guy couldn't feel it, but he could sense the emotions that went along with it. So it looks very, very cruel to be putting electricity through somebody's face, but all in the name of research so that you and I know what a Duchenne smile is. We can tell the difference between a real smile, a genuine smile, and an artificial one absolutely automatically. It all comes down to the crinkling around the eyes. These muscles cannot be voluntarily contracted. They're only contracted when we're genuinely smiling. By the way, I often ask, who do you think this is? This is Brad Pitt. The top one, genuine smile. Look at the crinkles around the eyes. The bottom one, trust me, he's smiling, but it never got past his lips. So we tend to instinctively, as I say here, mimic the facial expressions around people or of those people around us. So when we smile at somebody, they smile back. When they smile back, we mimic them and we smile more. And suddenly emotions and mood are communicated. So every time you're meeting clients, as you're walking into a room, for crying out loud, smile. To work on smiling and to develop, if you're one of those people it doesn't come naturally to, first off, master Duchenne. Now, this little guy here is my grandson, and he's only 2 years of age. And when his granny is feeding him food, she'll do what every mother in the world does. She'll use the spoon to take off the little spills. Well, when he was about 1.5, he noticed that there was a little spill that she had missed on his lip, and he started doing this. Couldn't talk, but he started doing this. And everybody laughed. And ever since now, he has a habit of doing this. So let me show you, and I'll make the point of why am I showing you this piece of video. So here is Tommy in action. What's up? Is there some on your face? Now, all I have to do is just think of that, and I am smiling all over my face. I cannot help myself. When you want to project a friendly, open image, smile. And if you want to master a Duchenne smile, think of the person you love most in the world. So make it a habit to greet everybody with a Duchenne smile. Give them eye contact, smile, and make a positive comment. Hi, how are you? You're looking well today. Hi, how are you? It's really good to see you, etc. So let's talk about the eyes. And the eyes have often been called the charismatic windows to the soul. And eye contact has a big impact. In most cultures, eye contact or failing to make eye contact is a negative thing. It is critical to trust to make eye contact with people. Now, you need to be careful not to overdo it, but when we avoid eye contact, when we say, look at my face now on the camera or on the video at the top of your screen, when we say, honest to God, I am telling you the absolute truth, and we won't make eye contact with people, most cultures, we find that to be shifty. So when we're communicating with people and we want to make an honest, genuine point that makes people feel at ease, we need to say, I am being totally straight with you. This is the way we are going to do this. I make you my commitment, eye contact. We talk a lot in our culture about look me in the eye and tell me that, or she just couldn't look me in the eye. Now, please, it's outside the scope of this short conversation about body language, but be aware that there are cultures where eye contact can be considered to be aggressive. Make sure you know what culture you're in. But in most Western influenced cultures, we need eye contact. And whether it's a bad thing in your culture or not, if you want to communicate with people who operate according to westernized type rules, communication, you need to make eye contact. Now, be careful the eye contact doesn't turn into the stalker eye contact. Some people read it as grab people's eyes and stare into them. And I often see younger salespeople and younger folks who have been told to keep eye contact doing this. And it just freaks people out. 3 to 5 seconds maximum every so often, and then looking up or around the person, the rest of the person's body, moving from eye to eye, can, like the window wipers, just right now, not like that, but just looking somebody in the eye and then relaxing the gaze and then coming back and looking at the other eye can make for a different sense. It doesn't feel quite as much of a stare. But here's the key thing, is just when you're trying to communicate to people, whether you're communicating one-to-many in a pitch situation or one-on-one, make eye contact. Make sure they're comfortable with it, but make eye contact. There is a myth that only liars do not make eye contact. People who are shy or withdrawn often fail to make eye contact. Doesn't make them liars, it makes them shy or withdrawn. And there's this idea that if people who are telling the truth tend to make eye contact, people who are telling lies don't make eye contact. In actual fact, the research suggests that when people are lying or exaggerating, they tend to overdo the eye contact thing. What use you make of that, that's your decision. But just be aware if you are exaggerating a little bit or you're downright lying. It's likely that if you buy into the idea that good eye contact is essential to trust, you may be overdoing it. Be aware of the eye contact you're making. And this is the whole message throughout this segment. It's one of awareness. Know what your face is doing. Know what your body is doing. Know what your hands are doing. Be aware what your eyes are doing. Then you're able consciously, as with that awareness, to do something about it. I love this. Can you mistake this man's message? I mean, really, if he had nothing else to say, he has 2 things going on there. One is the finger and the other is those eyes. You just know you're in deep doo-doo dealing with this guy. This guy, if you're on the end of that finger. That is, the eyes are a very powerful way of communicating, and don't underestimate their value when you're doing a presentation of one-to-many. Standing in front of people and making eye contact with the back quadrant of the room, everybody in that back quadrant will think you're making eye contact with them directly. Moving it to the right back quadrant, moving to the right front quadrant, moving it to the middle, moving to the left, and moving around. People sense that, oh, he's talking to me. It's not impersonal. Eyes are really, really effective. Final thing, or one of the most important things I want to talk about now is the handshake. Every day, when we go about our business, we're shaking people's hands. Friends' hands, colleagues' hands, clients' hands, and so on. And there's a very good reason for that. If we were face-to-face, I'd show you the evolution of the handshake from Roman times, when people used to grasp up the sleeve of one another's garb to be sure that there was no hidden weapon. So the clasp was like that. And then it went back to, in Roman times, it's very hard to do this yourself, but an upward type clasp of the hands. And then it progressed into being the handshake that we know today. It had 2 purposes. One is it allows people to see that you're not carrying weapons. And we instinctively feel vulnerable, so we feel the need to know that somebody has not got something, quote unquote, up their sleeve. But the second thing is, when we touch people as we discussed on the program, we release in ourselves and in them, particularly when a touch is welcome, we release a hormone called oxytocin. And as we discussed on the program, on the day that you were born and your mama picked you up for the first time, your body flooded with oxytocin. Her body flooded with oxytocin, and oxytocin tells us this person's a friend, we're safe, bond with them. When we shake hands with somebody, there's an injection of oxytocin, which adds to the oxytocin that's injected by all of the other things we spoke about on the program, the way you show up, the things that you say, who you are, and so on and so forth, to give that feeling of trust. It's the bonding and trust hormone. So when you shake hands with somebody, there's a great opportunity to start to develop some trust. Now, if we were together face-to-face, we do a demonstration on the handshake. I can't do it in this situation. What I want to say to you is that be aware when you're shaking somebody's hand, that when you're shaking somebody and they drive your palm down or you drive their palm down, that there is an instinctive feeling that, quote unquote, the person who has the hand on top has what we would call colloquially the upper hand. It's a power move. Now, you will meet people who've read the body language book, and they will shake your hand, put your hand out, grasp it, and then turn your hand over so that your hand is facing down. And the impact upon you is very subtle, but it's very real. It triggers your emotional brain to feel dominated. It's a power play by that person, palms down. Palms up makes us feel comfortable. So when our palm is on the top, you know, it makes us feel we're in control. We're in charge of this situation. And when it's just straight out or neutral, it sends neither of those signals. Now, what I suggest when you're meeting somebody that you want to make a positive, trusting impression upon is, first off, present your hand absolutely neutrally. You do not want to be going in and saying, hey, I'm a pussycat, dominate me. Okay? Even if it's a very, very subtle sensation, just don't let your hand be tipped over that way. Now, don't turn it into a struggle, but don't tip your hand. But what you can do when you shake hands with somebody absolutely straight on like that, just pumping it like that a little bit, what you get is a sensation of this is a partnership of equals. Neither of us is dominating the other. If you want to make the other person feel more comfortable, you might tilt your hand just slightly. You might just decide to give them a little bit of the upper hand. Now, be careful not to overthink this. As you're walking in to shake hands, what you should be looking for is just simply a straight out handshake. And this is something that's difficult for the ladies very frequently when they meet somebody who has one of those bone crusher handshakes. But in general, what you should seek to do is give about the same pressure on the clasp as you receive from the other person. So if somebody gives you a bone crusher, give them a bone crusher back. Just try to balance it out to give them just about the same pressure. You can, again, if we were doing a demonstration, I'd encourage you to look and see, what does that feel like? Is that a 7 out of 10? Is that a 10 out of 10 in terms of how tight it is? And just to match it back. So in short, and do I have one here? No, I don't. In short, when you're shaking hands with somebody, hands straight out, give them about the same pressure as they give you. And if you want to, you can just tilt your hand slightly just to give them a little bit of that upper hand sensation. But the key thing is use the handshake. Don't become part of this fad that's starting to take place in certain parts of the world where people are refusing the handshake and they're doing this fist bump thing and so on. It doesn't have the same impact because there's not the same level of touch. Handshake is a way of bonding with people. It's a small part of the overall mix. Now, there is this, we tend to look at people, when people are getting a photograph taken, we tend to feel that the person who is on the left-hand side has what the body language people often refer to the left side advantage. And so you will see politicians all the time when it comes to a photo opportunity, you'll see them dancing around trying to be the one on the left. So you noticed here with Blair, what Bush is trying to do is send the signal that he's the dominant partner. His handlers have told him to do that. And as we look at that picture, instinctively, And automatically, we do feel the dominant person in that picture is Bush, the guy on the left. Now, there are ways to combat this if you care. If you have an opportunity and it doesn't upset anybody and you're getting a picture taken with anybody, why not take the left side? Because it does give you a slight psychological advantage. Here we have Putin and Bush, and you can see not only is Putin taking the left side advantage, but you notice the way with his other hand he's kind of closing down Bush's arm. All psychological sort of signals, which are probably not conscious on the part of Putin, but it's very clear who is in control of this particular exchange. Again here. Here's an interesting one. I think this man was the Prime Minister of Slovenia, the guy on the right. So Blair got in there and he got the left side advantage. And I guess this guy had been told by his handlers, whatever you do, make sure your hand's on the outside. He reached across and he made it look all friendly, but the impression is, hey, it's me. And look at the reaction on Blair's face. You can kind of see the impact on that. He looks enfeebled. Here's one where Barack Obama, with Barack Obama and his colleague, who I think was the Indian Prime Minister. Please forgive me. My memory is not great on political figures. Obama took the left side advantage and the other gentleman put his hand on top. So he took it back. And here's the same gentleman, another one, where it turned into like one of those children's games. The man on the left, who I think was the Pakistani Prime Minister at one stage, again, please forgive me if I'm not accurate, was shaking hands. He had the left side advantage. The other gentleman put his hand over the top, and then the first gent put it over the top again. So just be aware of the left side advantage and watch for people who are trying to take it. There are people who are making a move. They're trying to communicate a very strong image. And if you have a choice, take that advantage. Let me share a couple of absolute no-nos, things you just don't want to do from a body language point of view, okay? First one is hands over the crotch. Sometimes when we're feeling under pressure, our hands automatically fall down to cover our crotch. Now, not as dramatically as these two gents. This guy on the right, obviously there's a ball going to be coming at him at a couple of 100 miles an hour. It's a very sensible thing to have your hand over your crotch. But you're making a presentation, somebody asks you a question that you feel defensive about. The last thing in the world you want to do is to have your hands automatically go to cover your vulnerable parts, whether it's the abdomen, lower abdomen, or the crotch. So just be aware, whatever you do, do not adopt this fig leaf. I'll give you something to do in the event that you can't figure out what to do with your hands. And again, this is not giving you a million things to think about when you're interacting with people. Just saying to you, once you know that this is an issue, then trust me, that awareness is going to show itself in the way that you behave in future in these situations. Second thing is fidgeting. Picking your nails, picking at the skin around your nails, twiddling your thumbs, tapping your feet. Any sort of fidgeting sends a subconscious signal that you're ill at ease. You may not be, but that's the way people read it. Don't play with your hair, don't play with your nails, don't pick the skin on your hands, don't scratch your nose, all of those sort of things. They're distracting. People touch their lips, play with their hair, fiddle with their hands, etc. And touching the nose is my favorite one. It automatically happens when I'm uncomfortable. Don't allow it. Just be aware of it. And when you become aware of it, close it down. You can see the message. You can see in this guy's face. Now, there's a little bit more going on in that face that tells you a little bit more about the fact that he's feeling a tad nervous. But just that biting on it, yeah, I'm perfectly confident of my position. Of course, I'm happy that what I'm saying to you is completely accurate, and you don't need to worry about, you get my message. Another no-no, so other no-nos, self-touching of any kind. And self-touching sounds a little bit rude, but what I mean is, you know, comforting yourself, putting your hand up here. That's a very favorite one with ladies and a lot of gents. I have pictures of Putin with his hand up there covering, I think it's the supernormal, anyway, it doesn't matter. Covering up here, it's a vulnerable part of the body. Touching yourself, touching your arms, scratching your knees, scratching your feet, etc. So keep your hands away from your face. Keep it away from over your mouth. Over your mouth says I'm maybe exaggerating or lying. Arms crossed. Many people have become amateur body language readers. And many people in the world, like me, are perfectly comfortable standing with their arms crossed. I actually find it a very relaxing rest position. And people who have speed read the body language books can look at somebody who has arms crossed and say, he's being defensive. He's closed off. He's not sure of what he's saying to me. He may be lying. He's being evasive, and so on and so forth. And they could be entirely wrong. They could just be entirely comfortable. For that reason, if you're communicating to somebody, just don't cross your arms. Keep the arms open. Don't let them cross. Don't allow for that misapprehension. Now, when you do see somebody, oh, that's genuinely itchy here. When you do see somebody in reaction to a question you ask or something and have it suddenly close their arms, that's different. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. But what I would say defensively, don't cross your arms in front of people. Keep them open. Keep your body entirely open. Keep your hands away from your genitals. No clenched fists, no hidden palms. Try to keep them up as much as possible. Clenched fists says anger or stress or anxiety. Keep them open. And keep the body generally, throat, torso, genitals, your stance open. And avoid downcast eyes. So those are the sort of no-nos. And they're all fairly sensible sort of no-nos. Here's an emergency fix. If you find yourself getting twitchy and ill at ease in a presentation, and you don't know what to do with your hands. You're standing there waiting to go onto the stage and you're thinking, oh, I put my hands in my pocket and McCann said, don't do that. Put my hands over my crotch. Oh my God, I've got the fig leaf. I just folded my arms. Oh my God, that can be read wrong. Either put your hands behind your back. That can look a little bit arrogant and a little bit militaristic, or reposition them into a power gesture. This is a power gesture. Keep it down low, but that's a power gesture. So the steeple is one. The Superman is another, so reposition them, or not distract them, but use your hands. Begin to take notes, or just let them hang by your side, and maybe you need to practice that. But just be aware that your hands communicate a huge amount. So those are kind of the fundamentals of body language. So now the question becomes, do I go about reading body language or not? Well, let me give you a couple of guidelines. First, if you're going to read somebody's body language, you need to know them. That means you need to know what is their norm, what's normal for them, and that means observing them for 5 to 10 minutes in a low-stress environment. So don't walk into somebody on day one and think because they got their arms folded and their legs folded and so on and so forth, that automatically that means they're totally closed off. It could be, or it could be something that's just completely normal and natural for them. So this is something where you can observe somebody over a period of time, 5 to 10 minutes is the minimum, when they're not under stress, and see what's normal for them. How do they sit? How do they hold themselves? How do they stand? What do they do with their hands? What's a normal level of eye contact? So what's their norm? So just be aware of what their norm is. And then if there's any sudden departure, somebody's standing perfectly comfortable, suddenly their hands go into the fig leaf. Suddenly they're scratching their head and they're holding their hands over their mouth. Suddenly they've crossed their arms. Suddenly they move back in their chair and put their hands over their torso. Whatever it is, inside your mind, you just think any sudden shift, what causes that? And just like we said during the program, when you talk about use of self and feeling into emotional changes of temperature when you're having a conversation with somebody, when they do that, call them on it. Ask yourself, why are they suddenly folding their arms? Why are they suddenly breaking eye contact? Why are they suddenly putting in new closed gestures or self-touching? So what I would say when that happens is just say, look, I sense, Deiric, that something I said there didn't go down well. Did I get something wrong? Or is it just me, or did I just say something that wasn't comfortable for you? Or maybe just change direction and just say, of course, that's just one option. We have option 2. Just notice when you got those dramatic changes, but don't try to be the body language expert, reading every twitch and snort and movement of the hands and the rest of the body. In general, look at gestures in context. Look at the way somebody's reacting in context. is the way they are behaving and the gestures that they're demonstrating and the facial expressions that they got, are they appropriate to the context? If they are, well then, no matter how undesirable they might be, they're explicable and it's useful information. So be careful not to misinterpret. Context can have an awful lot to do with the way we behave. The other thing is, don't just look at one change in somebody's body language. Look for clusters. Here's Barack Obama. Look at the eyes first off. I mean, the eyes are staring. Those eyes are really saying something. Either, hey, I've got you in my sights, or you're the most important person in the room. Which is it? I'm wondering. Then you look at the mouth. Lips are pursed strongly together. You can see that his jaw is clenched, which is a sign of anger, and the arms are folded. Maybe, and I don't know, maybe a few minutes beforehand, his arms were folded and he suddenly went, what? What are you saying to me? Tell me more about that. So look for combinations, look for clusters. If you see something you think changed, don't be afraid to look and see, is there any other evidence? The third thing is, look for the conflict between the verbal and nonverbal. And by the way, apply this to yourself as well. Because as I said earlier, when we see a conflict between what somebody is saying and what their body language is saying, we believe their body language and facial expressions. We tend to trust the nonverbal signals. So be very careful of the signals you're sending and be very aware of the signals that other people are sending. And then finally, as I said, probe. When somebody displays body language that concerns you, that makes you think I've done something wrong, ask a question. Hey, you know what? I noticed when I mentioned the cost of this particular option that the temperature dropped 1 or 2 degrees. Is this a problem? Or you might even just change it and say, there are other cost options, of course, and we're going to explore those later on. There are lots of ways to approach this, but just be aware of it and bring it into the conversation. And when you ask a question, watch the face and body language for the first 4 seconds. The first 4 seconds, you get the micro expressions, you get the leakage. Just become aware. And that's the main message of this presentation. Don't become hyper vigilant. Just allow yourself, as you walk in and you're setting that intention, I'm going to be open to this person, set the intention that I'm going to be aware of everything that's being communicated to me verbally and non-verbally. So let me finish off by talking about what I call the body language channel. Body language is another medium of communication. It's usually unintentional. I mean, when we do this, it's quite intentional, but the sort of body language we need to be aware of is the unintentional, where it gives us an insight into what other people are thinking. It conveys your thoughts, your attitudes, and your self-confidence wordlessly. And it's the same for every human on the planet. Smiling conveys a particular attitude to people of positivity, interest, and warmth. Watch for other people's smile. Use your smile. Make it a habit every time you greet anybody to smile. You'll feel better because you get an injection of serotonin and dopamine. They'll feel better because they'll smile because we're programmed to mimic, and they'll get an injection of serotonin and dopamine. Eye contact, in general, reveals a greater openness, honesty, and trustworthiness. And we understand and accept the message from body language much more quickly than we do words. So don't become overly obsessed with people's body language. It's an interesting area of study, but it's an imperfect science, if indeed it is a science at all. But it can be a source of information that adds to the other sources of information that you have from the conversations you're having with your clients and your contacts that tells you better how to navigate that relationship. When you're reading other people, you must consider their norms. You cannot walk in unless you're a lifelong studier of body language and immediately tell what somebody else is thinking. Don't even try to become a body language reader, except for fun. Just be aware of yours. The key is knowing what is your body language saying, and then ensuring your body language and your verbal language agree. That's the whole of this session. That's what I wanted to communicate to you. I'm going to send you this white paper that summarizes much of what I've covered today. But as I said at the outset, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you've any questions, whatever, on this topic. It has been a pleasure delivering this material to you. Looking forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye-bye.